Okay, so starting into this new fourth period, this is the 1615 turn. A lot of things change in this period. This is really kind of the big shift towards, hey, colonization, new production, all kind of stuff like that. So for example, we've got two new commodities available, tobacco and sugar. Cotton is not available yet. Cotton doesn't come, I think, until 1700. But these operate a little differently than most of the other resources in the world. Try to look. So here and in the Pacific, they operate more or less like regular resources. I think you have to set up an actual colony to make them work. You can't just use a trading post. And I think they come one for one. Maybe one for two. No, it's got to be one for one. I'll look it up. But in the New World, it's a little different. Pretty sure it's one for two. And you have to expend a slave, which is actually a more expensive commodity initially, to even produce these. So for example, if you want to start producing tobacco, you'd have to get a slave to the colony. Now, the colony, I'm not sure. I'll have to look these up because I don't really remember them, and it's great that I knew this would happen, that I'd forget things and start talking about them. But essentially, you have to either produce your own slaves and ship them there, and these are ones that won't go to market then in Europe. But what will come to market is the produce, and again, that's for every level of the colony, for every 2 levels of the colony, you can ship one item of produce. Now, one of the goals to this, there's a couple reasons you'd want to do this. One, even though you're losing money, you get the monopoly bonus, which gives you extra victory points. And they're fairly cheap victory points. I mean, a slave costs you $4. You're probably, although not at the beginning, but you're probably going to get $1 or 2 in return for that if you have just a level 2 colony. And if you have a higher level colony, you can actually make money off these even if the product is lower value. But the biggie is the victory points here for having a monopoly in them. Now, okay, so should England worry about this, creating tobacco, or should they allow the Portuguese and the Spanish to create the tobacco? That's a hard call. And it depends on the situation, because it's going to cost England money to deprive Spain of victory points. But on the other hand, Spain's maybe not doing so well, so letting them have those cheap victory points might not be an unreasonable solution. This also opens up the idea of asiento, which is the right to trade primarily slaves, and that's really all that's covered in the game, with the Spanish colonies. And this becomes a victory condition that can be taken in war. And then you must supply them with a needed amount of slaves. And I don't remember whether there's a limit on that. I think you have to supply them with some specific number if they need them. And then you get paid directly for those, which is kind of a cool situation because you're able to sell the slaves. So this is one of the things. It increases the value of the slaves because you're depressing the total amount being sold back in Europe. So there's a lot of little elements in play about that. Also, of course, like any other new period, I had to pick all these options, and I also had to update the army sizes. And this is one of the weird things in the game. Miners operate on, hey, my army is based, and this is kind of reasonable, on what technology level it's at. But the major powers are based on what period are we in. So it doesn't really matter whether their armies have advanced or not. They have a fundamental change in their composition based on these period change turns. It's just one of those other weird little dichotomies between, how the miners are handled and how the major powers are handled. That kind of grates on me a little bit. We also have new values for DTI maximums, for manufacturing maximums, for the amount of diplomacy each player can do. Everything kind of shifts based on these period turns, where a lot of factors in the game take place. This is also the period where the galleys no longer get their bonus in the Mediterranean. So if you're going to fight a Mediterranean war, well, galleys are still significantly cheaper, but they're no longer more effective than warships. And in fact, they have a disadvantage on the combat tables as well. So between the two, galleys are losing their edge quite a bit at this point. And there's one more. I don't know. Anyway, let's go to the victory condition selections to give you an idea where we're aiming. The English want the Atlantic trade, which they already have, although it's a very close run thing right now, and they want the navigation acts passed. That's an event. They can't really terribly control that, but here's the thing. Once it comes up, the Dutch have the right to contest it. And so that's kind of important. They also made an agreement with both the Dutch and the French to prevent the Habsburgs from getting the empire. I missed the last election. There's one coming up on this turn. But that's probably not the important one. Probably the important one is at the end of this phase, whenever that is, which I think is down here, 1660. And that's one of the problems with the turn track and the way it works, at least when I have all these counters on top of it, is I can't tell when necessarily the upcoming phase is. Yeah, it's included on all the charts and tables and everything, but it's often not. I'm often surprised when I see that little red number being revealed, and I'm like, oh shit, we got to do something fast. That's an issue to keep in mind, though, because you can't really predict when the emperor is going to die. You know when the current emperor is going to die, and in this case we know this one's going to die now, but we don't really know for sure, on the next one, whether or not he'll be the person who had to be elected. And that's really kind of a specialized situation with the Risto offense, and they add this victory condition. Also, he wants to have 4 adjacent colonies in North America, and he mostly has that. He just has to add one more up here, or in Maine, which isn't terribly useful, but one more in the Americas in the north to connect to Quebec will help there. And a new trading post or colony in India. Okay. France agreed with the no Habsburgs in Spain. They get a bigger bonus off of it. They selected it as a more important option, and they have their penalty on it. They want a new border province from the Holy Roman Empire or from the old Burgundian Empire's territory. What they're seeing is Franche-Comté could be added fairly easily. Spain is kind of having some trouble. Hey, maybe it's time. They also want a monopoly in their CTC, and they want Scotland not to be a permanent vassal or annexation of the English. That may not be something they can control. Basically, though, with the Risto events, there's only one penalty event available, so you have kind of a lot more of, well, let's just take this one, maybe it'll happen. I can't get any of the others. The Netherlands wants a Protestant emperor, and that's part of their agreement with the English and French. They want, it doesn't have to be them. It can be a minor power. They can, try to get, as it stands right now, I think Hanover's not an elector, but they've got Brandenburg as the elector, which, maybe Prussia now, which is a powerful, that gives them 1 vote already. They need 5 more. The Habsburgs have 1 with Bohemia. And I've got to kind of count through the others and see, hey, what do we need to bribe? What do we not need to bribe? What countries do we need to get under control? So Bohemia makes things hard, but the Palatinate has an electorate. There's one more. Saxony? Yeah. And so that's the 4 there. Cologne has it. electorate. And then there's a couple that don't have a counter. You can't, you just have to bribe them as neutrals. Otherwise, they'll vote for the Habsburgs automatically. But with so many countries trying to defeat the Habsburg Emperor, it should happen. There's a question here. Really, England is the biggest question here because they're only getting 45 points for this. They might be willing to let it slip in order to penalize some of the other people more in the lead. They probably shouldn't have taken this pick or agreed to it. They want Protestant allies. They want the Indies Orientales fleet, which comes from delivering 10 or more products of the Orient and spices. Right now, Portugal, I believe, has it. And Portugal's a real player again. Well, not a real player, but they're part of Spain now. This is a little different. In the original game, Portugal kind of was very abstracted under Spain's control. The Risto event seems to specify a lot of stuff about the Portuguese income coming completely into Spanish control and stuff like that in a way that the original rules didn't do. So I think aspects like that are going to come into play and be more to Spain's advantage than they were before. Okay, and they want the Mediterranean trade, and they do not want the Navigation Act. That's one of their selections. And then they've got a penalty for non-Dutch trading posts in Asia. By not selecting this, they take a half-point penalty. I'm not sure that's the way it should be done with the Risto rules, but with the original rules, when you get a penalty, if you choose not to take it as one of your goals, you only pay half the penalty. Russia. Poor Russia. Russia wants a string of interconnected stuff going down to Manchu. Basically colonize trading posts all throughout Asia, Siberia. They want to get Smolensk and Kiev back. This has a penalty if they don't get it. But, their choices were just so bad that they're just saying, fine, we'll take our chances with Poland again and see if we can beat them. I don't think that's a good idea. They want all the Khanates annexed. That includes Siberia. I don't know what Siberia's state is now. I think they're defeated. I don't think they have natives anymore. But after that revolt, I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know if they have to be defeated again. Even the Risto rules have real problems in them. The original rules, I don't feel like had as big a problem with that aspect. It's just such a big game that it's hard to get everything perfect. That also means they want the steppes in Kazan and Astrakhan. Great. But they want Kazan back. Well, more anti-Polish activity going on there. I think they've got way too much, and they can't possibly do any of it, really. And then they want a port on the Gulf of Bothnia or the Baltic, a new port, which they could get off of Poland. They don't necessarily have to go to war with Sweden, but if they're taking Sweden on too, it's just out of the question. And historically, they really did. They had a hard time this period. Spain wants to maintain their annexation of Portugal. They want the most sugar in America. Or, and this is the easy one, the Habsburgs annexing all of Hungary back. I think they're one space short of that. And they're probably going to throw the Habsburgs into a war with the Turks again. So, cleaned up some of the Habsburg markers because they actually do have a homeland defined on the map. And they want the most minor allies in either the Holy Roman Empire or in Italy. Minor thing. And if they get both, they get double points for that. Okay, for the Turks. Well, the Turks had nothing good. No Christian port on the Black Sea or Caspian. That they can get. That's not too hard. They just have to keep the Crimea alive and keep the Russians out of Astrakhan, which they may be able to do. Mediterranean trade. Ooh, that's not going to be very likely, but okay. Especially since the Dutch are interested in it as well. And half of all Muslim miners vassal. Well, there's so many left on the board, that's not very likely either. But, whatever. I mean, Oh, they have none right now. They have Moldavia, which isn't Muslim. And they tried it last time. More slaves produced than anyone else. Yeah, they may not even be able to do that. I don't think they have their explorer anymore. They lost all their other, they have not been able to set up the out of the rest of the world empire. And this is a problem with Turkey because they have these goals, but they don't have the power to enforce it. Last period, they had the power to kind of put themselves into place, maybe in Africa. But they don't have the power to maintain it, which is to say someone else can go and set up more, colonies and trading posts in Africa, and they don't really have the ability to keep doing so. And of course, there may be the Portuguese problem, although they've diminished significantly this game. And finally, yes, this is their penalty, which they chose not to take, which is no Christian ports in the Aegean or the East Med. Now, this involves a big war with Venice, which historically happened, but this Turkey, and I've never seen a Turkey able to make that war happen. I've never seen one try, because they're always so far behind their historical goals. And that's just to me, it's a problem. Maybe it's I can't play the game right. Maybe I've got some rules wrong. But it looks to me like Turkey's goals in this game are just, things they cannot reach. I'm not saying they can't wipe the Mamluks out early. They can. They can wipe the Hungarians out early. Taking both of them in the very early game is what you kind of have to do. You also have to take the knights out. Okay. Even once you get all of those, by this point in the game, they're degenerating. So their army just, look at these technological. Now this isn't forced. The Turks could have kept pushing. If they were doing really well, they could keep pushing the technology up. But they're not, and they can't. And now they have a limit, I think, where they can't pass the Baroque period until they reform their army. And that's kind of that should be the indication of when they really, really fail as a military power. Economically, they had problems. Their dynasty had issues. But the military was still pretty strong. But we never see it because Turkey's always so pressured. And we see that very clearly here with the Persia. We're going to see the Habsburgs jumping in on them again, trying to get another territory at least. And it's just not a pleasant situation to play Turkey after, say, the first two periods. And during those first two periods, it's very, very challenging to the extent where I've never seen them manage their historical levels. I think I've seen every other country except Russia hit their historical at least in the 6 or so playings that I've had. I've seen, everyone do quite well at some time or another, and this time France seems to be doing quite well. England's not doing too badly, but I don't think they're matching, I don't think they're exceeding their historical by much. France seems to be, with their Italian territories and just their overall position. All right, let's get the events and the economic out of the way, I guess, and then probably end up doing the military on a separate bid. Oh, joy. All right, let's see what happens. We ran through the basic, the monarch survival, and things didn't turn out too well there. And a whole heap of people dying, and I don't know who went, who didn't. I know the Dutch did, Turkey did. France got Richelieu as a political event, which is kind of similar to Dutch. I think the Spanish did too. They got a baby on the throne there. It was not too bad. Anyway, other than being too young to rule. Anyway, bunch of new leaders, most of them pretty piss poor, to tell you the truth. Richelieu is kind of a weird situation because he's not as good as Henry IV, but which is kind of surprising because Richelieu is pretty damn good. But for the heir to the throne, he gets to use Richelieu's ratings and he doesn't have the penalty, as far as I can see, that one normally has with an excellent minister. So, and it makes sense because that's essentially Louis XIV there. So there's kind of I don't see why not to take it. The French can refuse the event, but I see no reason to refuse it, to tell you the truth. And they get an extra shipping fleet, which came here, and an advantage on external operations, including shipping, trade placement, etc. So they're kind of in a position where not only did they get a monopoly off of it down here, you can see there's a plus there now, which gives them half the income of the sea zone, as well as a victory point each turn. A good thing. A full monopoly gives you the entire value. That's what they have here, and 3 victory points a turn. That requires 6 trading fleets there. It only takes 4 for a partial monopoly. Anyway, they got that, and I see no downside to having Richelieu. So it seemed like there may be he may have a downside in terms of causing problems with the Edict of Nantes. I don't know either way. But looking at what I'm able to see right now, I say, hey, there's no problem with this. Okay, so beyond that, though, some minor events there. Turks got a renewal of popularity, gave them some money and other things that they're not going to be able to do anyway. French got a diplomatic bonus with Scotland. The Spanish got to boost their naval technology up above battery. So right now this is going to fall, but not until after any advances in the administrative phase. So it's going to drop down to here. So the Turks don't want to buy a naval advance this turn. An army advance won't hurt them, though. May not help them either, though. That's one of the problems with being back here. Pretty much between here and here, there's nothing. So until Muscat passes the Spaniards, it makes no difference. The only reason to keep pumping money in would be to try to catch up to the Western European powers, because there's a penalty involved for being as far behind as the Turks are. But that's generally not worth doing. That's way too much money. Okay, so the Dutch got a scandal, and that kills the $50, which threw them into bankruptcy. Their stability is down in the toilet. They lost a manufactory. They lost some shipping power in the rest of the world because they're interested in the Mediterranean now. Just a horrible, horrible event for them. And it made France think, I can go to war with the Dutch, maybe. And they may well do that this turn. Then for the other events, Richelieu, as we said, the Mongols expanded into Marathi. At some point or another, they may be going into a place where they're going to affect people. I think they're already in Gujarat, so the English aren't in danger there, but I think they do maybe make a strike into Carnatic at the end of their period. So the Dutch may have a problem with that, having to defend that from them. But here's the ugly one. Times of trouble in Russia. And damned if I can figure this sucker out. It was easier in the original rules. But basically, there's a bunch of new revolts, and that was hard to roll because most of the territories that Russia can get revolts in aren't in Russia right now. But they had to get them in Russia, so pretty unlikely that they could get a roll. Moscow's excluded. They only had a few that were possible, and they didn't get any. They had trouble getting them. Anyway, 3 of their territories are in revolt. There's a big army under Dmitry, for this turn at least, that's under English control. They're handling the revolt. The Russians have to make a decision during the diplomatic phase. Poland and Sweden offer a crown prince to rule Russia. And if Russia refuses either, and they can't accept both, so they must refuse at least one of them, that country goes to war. The other country, if it's given one, will make a promise It requires a promise of land from Russia, and this is how Nua ends up in Swedish hands historically. I think the Russians are probably going to promise something to the Poles because they have a lot of Polish territory they need to take, and they don't want to lose Nua. So after that, and it could be both countries are at war with Russia, but at least one is, an expeditionary force is sent in favor of either the rebellion or the monarch, the current monarch. And oh my God, the way this is written, I can't quite figure it out completely. But basically, when the war ends, Russia's just more screwed. I mean, I really can't even describe this because I don't have a good enough clue about what it says. I'm going to try to screw with it and try to make it work. But I'll tell you, these Risto events are not that much better than the original events. And in this particular case, I'm not impressed with it at all. This one's almost impenetrable to me. It's going to take probably an hour to figure out what the hell's going on in it, which, you know, that wasn't the case for me with the Times of Trouble before. It was an ugly event, and it's still an ugly event. But this one's gotten more historically correct in that now there's like the creation of the Ukraine from it and all kind of weird shit like that from later rolls of the event. Anyway, suffice it to say, Russia's screwed worse than they were. I'm going to cut this video. I'm not going to deal with the diplomatic phase and stuff on this one. I'll add it to the other one because I'm out of time.